The French shark and the Queen of Darkness, Cate Blanchett, are collaborating for the first time. Together, they will star in a Mr. and Mrs. Smith version with a high IQ, promising to spark a unique fire. The British National Cybersecurity Centre has lost a deadly cyber virus. Once it falls into the wrong hands, the whole world will fall into an unprecedented crisis. But the French shark is horrified to discover that his wife is very likely the mole who stole the virus. He is forced to choose between national duty and his marriage vows. Should he be loyal to his country or trust his wife? Enough talk, let's start right away. The main character is named George. He is a senior agent. That night, he went to secretly meet his superior, passing through the noisy crowd in the bar, then going around the messy dance floor, before George could meet his superior. The two went outside to talk in detail. The other person told George that his suspicions were correct. There was indeed a traitor in the team. George received the piece of paper. On it were 5 suspects, and his wife, Kathryn, was on the list. The reason the superior gave was simple: Kathryn was also a senior agent with security access, with both motive and ability. He could only report the truth. The British National Cybersecurity Centre had lost the important Severus device. Once Severus was deployed as planned, thousands of innocent people would lose their lives. But George asked his superior to give him a week. He would definitely find the traitor, the condition being that the superior would temporarily not report the list. The superior was silent for a moment and finally nodded in agreement. Little did they know that this meeting between the two of them had been watched by someone. A few days later, George finished cooking the dishes for the party, then went upstairs to find his wife, Kathryn. To catch the traitor, George had invited those on the list to attend the dinner. Adding George and Kathryn, there were a total of 6 people at the dinner. Kathryn also knew that there was a traitor in the organization. She had thought that George would start with a lie detector, but unexpectedly, George chose a more discreet method. George told Kathryn not to eat the Indian chickpea curry because he had put truth serum in it. Kathryn paused upon hearing this, then nodded to indicate that she understood. After all, someone among them was lying. On the other side, the 4 people invited to the party gathered together. Among them, the black girl was a little curious and asked why they were gathering at this time. Why were there only 4 of them, and why was it announced only 24 hours in advance? But James felt that it was normal because they all worked together in the same field, and there were 2 married couples. This was not something that amateurs could compare with. Not long after, the 4 arrived at George's house. After dinner started, Kathryn took the lead in bringing up the story of when she participated in the Syrian cyber war in 2012, when she wrote code to hack into the enemy's central router, thereby paralyzing the entire system. Clarissa, upon hearing this, was immediately shocked. She had seen that extremely sophisticated code and did not expect it to be Kathryn's. Before they knew it, all 4 people attending the party had eaten the Indian chickpea curry with truth serum in it, and the words they spoke became increasingly bold. The round-faced man named Freddie suddenly revealed that George had been following his father, who was a womanizer and cheated frequently, rarely restraining himself. But at the same time, he was a high-level intelligence expert and acted very cautiously. He had dedicated almost his entire life to intelligence work, so his civilian wife basically couldn't get any evidence. But unexpectedly, his own son, who was also an agent, took action. George then filmed a video proving his father's infidelity and played it during a Sunday family meal. This completely ruined his father's career and marriage. After all, who would want to hire an intelligence expert who could be defeated by a child? The black girl couldn't help but ask George, "I heard he's very good at interrogation, almost legendary. Is it really impossible for anyone to lie in front of him?" Kathryn smiled slightly, reminding the black girl not to try it. George, estimating that the drug was about to take effect, suggested that everyone play a little game. Everyone would sit around the table, like at New Year's, and make a resolution for the person to their right, for example, a personal problem to solve, like quitting smoking. The game quickly came to the black girl's turn. The black girl was the department head, and the person to her right, James, was a very ambitious employee. So, the resolution that the black girl gave was for James to stop thinking about competing for the number 1 position all the time. James didn't say anything, just smiled and let it pass. But soon after, the biggest conflict of the night erupted, happening between the couple Clarissa and Freddie. Freddie was exposed for his misdeeds in front of everyone, and a burst of anger and shame immediately rose in his heart. Immediately after, he unleashed this anger on his wife, and he began to attack Clarissa with words. First, he didn't admit to the affair, criticizing Clarissa for slander, smearing a kind man who truly loved and respected her. Clearly, this kind of scum would never examine himself. He then used Clarissa's family problems to attack her, deliberately stabbing at Clarissa's sore spots. But Freddie, in his eloquence, did not expect that he would be exposed on the spot by George, just like George had exposed his father. George directly said the name of the hotel that Freddie and his mistress frequented. George even knew that Freddie often took advantage of department meetings to secretly meet with his mistress. Clarissa couldn't believe it and stabbed Freddie's hand hard with a steak knife. The dinner party finally ended in an utterly ridiculous way. After everyone left, Kathryn guessed that her husband had been a little heavy-handed with the drugs. George didn't refute it, but when he was cleaning up the mess, he found a torn movie ticket in the trash. But according to the time on the ticket, Kathryn should have been on a business trip abroad at that time. Could his wife really be a mole? George suppressed the suspicion in his heart, not showing it right away. On the other side, George's superior rarely came home. But when he finished the glass of wine in his hand, his body began to convulse uncontrollably, and he finally died tragically that night. The next day, George woke up earlier than usual and prepared breakfast. When Kathryn came downstairs, he pretended that nothing had happened, asking his wife if she wanted to go to the movies. Kathryn said that she had to go on a business trip abroad for a day on Wednesday. And when George said the name of the movie on the ticket, she also said she had never heard of it. However, George secretly put his employee ID card in his wife's bag when she wasn't paying attention. After that, George went to work on time. He lied to the receptionist that he had forgotten to bring his card and used his personal documents to make a temporary card. As soon as George entered the office floor, Freddie came over and told him that the superior had suddenly passed away last night due to coronary heart disease, but how could he have heart disease when he was so young? There must be something shady inside. Freddie also asked George if he knew what the superior had been researching recently. George would certainly not tell a suspicious person like him. He said he didn't know and continued looking for Kathryn. Soon after, George went to Kathryn's work floor to get his employee ID back. Because Kathryn was in a meeting in the meeting room, she handed her employee ID to George. George went non-stop to his wife's office. After swiping the card to open the door, George first put on rubber gloves to avoid leaving fingerprints, and then immediately turned on Kathryn's computer to check his wife's recent schedule. He found out that his wife would be traveling to Zurich this Wednesday and even marked the specific coordinates. George quickly wrote down the coordinates. On the other side, after Kathryn finished the meeting, she went to the black girl's office first, and the two sat face to face talking in detail. The black girl, as the head of the Signal Operations Department, needed to understand and record whether the agents had any psychological problems. Kathryn told the black girl that her sleep was still irregular and that she still needed to use lorazepam under 3 milligrams every night to help her sleep. The black girl frowned slightly after hearing this. The dosage and usage that Kathryn gave were just below the level she needed to report. So she suspected that Kathryn was hiding the real situation. Kathryn immediately denied this because she would not deliberately lie about this. Seeing this, the black girl had no other choice but to end the questioning and let Kathryn return to work. At the same time, George, after work, went to his familiar wild fishing spot. Fishing was his unique way of relieving stress. When fishing and thinking about problems, unexpected ideas often come to mind. George rowed a small boat to the middle of the lake, fishing and recalling the events that had happened in the past few days. Unexpectedly, he had bad luck, and his fishing line broke. At this time, George turned his head to look towards the shore and found that James had come looking for him. He hurried back to the shore. Sure enough, a big event had happened. James said that their financial staff had always cooperated with the British Tax and Customs Administration, periodically conducting comprehensive reviews of banks and tax-evading countries to prevent one of their virtual identities from being used to open an account abroad. There had never been a problem before, but this time, it was unexpectedly discovered that someone used the alias Margaret to open an account abroad. This name used to be an alias used by the Federal Bureau of Investigation 20 years ago and has been clearly prohibited in the database. But just yesterday, a huge sum of £7 million was transferred out of the account, so one of them stole a secret identity and used this identity to receive £7 million. And the transfer location of this huge sum of money was Zurich. George's heart tightened. Clearly, this matter once again pointed to Kathryn. In the evening, the couple went to the cinema to watch a movie. Throughout the screening, George always silently observed his wife, discovering that she seemed to have really never seen this movie before. At dawn, George took Kathryn to work. Because it involved secret operations, Kathryn didn't tell George what she was going to Zurich for. But George, to eliminate suspicion about his wife, definitely had to clarify everything, so he immediately went to Clarissa's house that night, wanting to ask Clarissa for a favor. Although Freddie and Clarissa had argued very fiercely that night, the two were still together now. One could only say that they were playing their parts. Clarissa still had some embarrassment on her face. George running to her house in the middle of the night definitely meant something was going to happen with her. Unexpectedly, George repeatedly denied it, because Clarissa was in charge of supervising the surveillance images of the headquarters. George needed to reposition the surveillance angle for a short time tomorrow morning and had to ensure that it was not locked or recorded. After hearing this, Clarissa quickly said that she couldn't do it. George patiently explained that during the short period of transferring surveillance rights, satellites could be used for other purposes without being detected. George had successfully tested this when performing a mission before. Clarissa didn't understand why George was so confident. She would risk helping with this. Personally, I have never discovered that using drugs has become a compromising factor, but if you add many lovers. Unexpectedly, Clarissa was so promiscuous, no wonder people say that birds of a feather flock together. With such a big weakness falling into George's hands, Clarissa had no choice but to listen obediently. She told James that there was a relatively safe, sealed isolation area in the headquarters that could be used for operations. The next day, George arrived early at the place Clarissa had mentioned. He told Clarissa the coordinates he had recorded, and now the two had only 3 minutes and 20 seconds left. Time was of the essence. Clarissa quickly used the satellite to start searching and finally located a chair in a square somewhere in Zurich. Soon after, Kathryn appeared in the vision of the two. Clarissa immediately revealed a smug look because she thought that George had also been cheated on. George calmly told Clarissa that to be agents like them, they had to do this to maintain the relationship between the two. If he was in trouble, even if it was caused by her, he would try his best to rescue her. Just then, a man sat down next to Kathryn. George told Clarissa to continue zooming in and then conduct facial recognition. Now there was only the last minute left of the window period, and they needed to hurry. The next second, Clarissa found out the man's identity. His name was Kulikov, and he was Russian. Then Clarissa plugged the lip-reading AI into the interface. Next, the two heard the content of the conversation. Kathryn seemed to be buying something from Kulikov. Seeing that there were only a few seconds left, Clarissa wanted to end the action, but found that she simply couldn't escape the system. In a panic, she missed the timing. Although she successfully escaped after withdrawing the AI, the image was still displayed on the big screen. George told Clarissa not to panic and to first delete all operation logs to ensure that no traces were left. At the same time, Freddie, after seeing the content on the computer, quickly called George. George was also extremely surprised after seeing it. Immediately afterwards, the superior summoned a secret meeting. It turned out that the Federation had recently been monitoring a Russian general named Vadim 24 hours a day. He had always been cooperating with a network of exiled warlords, plotting to overthrow the Russian government, which was struggling due to poor war management. There were rumors that Severus was in his hands, but the strange thing was that early this morning, the satellite responsible for monitoring him suddenly switched, creating a window period of 2.5 minutes. By the time everything returned to normal, Vadim had disappeared without a trace. How did the other party accurately grasp the satellite switching time, unless there was a mole in the headquarters? George's heart was about to jump out of his chest when he heard this. Who would have thought that what he and Clarissa did would accidentally let a dangerous person go? At this time, the leader mentioned the name Kulikov again. George quickly flipped through the documents in his hand, and it turned out that Kulikov was Vadim's subordinate. Then the leader asked the lower-ranking people to leave the meeting room, leaving only George, Freddie, and James. The leader told the three that Vadim had probably obtained Severus, which was also the reason they were monitoring Vadim. If Vadim finds a way to bring Severus back to Moscow, the consequences will be immeasurable. Severus is a type of polymorphic virus that they jointly researched and developed with the U.S. National Security Agency. It must be physically brought into a nuclear reactor to pass through the air gap, but once it penetrates, it can lock and melt the reactor core, making it an extremely dangerous cyber weapon. But then they realized that Severus could not leave the building. Otherwise, once it was leaked, other countries could also take advantage of it to cause a nuclear disaster. At that time, the security of the United States would face an extremely great threat. But now someone had helped Vadim divert attention so that he could take the virus drive and escape. The leader asked the three to quickly find the mole, no matter what means they had to use. After the meeting, George was still in shock. He didn't expect Clarissa to go directly to Freddie and tell him everything George had asked her to help with. On the other side, Kathryn boarded a plane to return. But when she got home, Freddie was already waiting at the door, telling her the things that had happened today. If Vadim successfully returns to Moscow, George will be held responsible and may face a 35-year prison sentence. Freddie then asked Kathryn if she knew why George was following her, but Kathryn didn't know either. In the evening, Kathryn was lying on the bed when George suddenly turned around. He felt like he was being framed. Kathryn also agreed. Clearly, this was a conspiracy aimed at them, someone was plotting against George. That person thought that George would act to protect his wife, and the truth was just that. Because of this, George fell into the trap and inadvertently let Vadim go. If he continues to investigate further, George will surely be considered a traitor. As for Kathryn, who associates frequently with Kulikov, it will surely be difficult to escape involvement, but the two would naturally not sit still and await death. The next day, George went to the wild fishing spot again, but this time he specifically called James to come. The two went out on the boat to the middle of the lake together. George told James that he was planning to arrange a series of lie detector tests. James didn't object, but he asked George who he suspected was the mole. George was silent for a moment, then slowly said that it was still impossible to determine. James suddenly changed the subject, talking about the bank case last time. According to his investigation, during this period, Margaret was the passport name that Kathryn had used in 2008. After that, the system experienced some errors, and this passport had been reused many times. It had even been circulating for 10 years, with at least 40 to 50 immigration records all using this passport. On the other side, Kathryn already had a plan to lure the snake out of its hole. She first approached Clarissa, asking her to provide Kulikov's phone travel route, and then secretly arranged to meet a good friend who worked at the CIA. After all, in the FBI, anyone could be a traitor right now. It turned out that after the previous meeting with Kulikov, she had secretly attached a tracking device to him. And this time, she used her connections to have the CIA deploy a Reaper drone, using the charge of endangering the nation to carry out an assassination of Kulikov and Vadim. This way, no one could accuse her of having contact with the Russians, and at the same time, it would cut off the transport of Severus. It could be said to kill two birds with one stone. Immediately afterwards, Kathryn approached her superior, Arthur, in a sushi restaurant. She understood very well that Arthur was definitely behind this, otherwise, how could her and George's positions be undermined by subordinates? Kathryn reminded Arthur that he had to stop the action immediately. Arthur smiled slightly, mocking Kathryn for being late, telling her to ask about the CIA drone's activity logs. Kathryn's doing this was also understandable. After all, once a meltdown occurred, countless innocent people would die unjustly. No matter how angry Arthur was, it was useless. At the same time, a drone was heading towards Kulikov and Vadim, flying at an extremely high speed, and then directly dropped a bomb. The fierce explosion killed both of them on the spot. Very quickly, everyone had arrived, and Kathryn announced the rules of the game. Everyone would take turns answering George's questions, and those who answered incorrectly would be punished. As Kathryn spoke, she took out a pistol from her bag and said bluntly, "Tonight, someone will not be able to leave this house." The black girl keenly noticed that the rug under the table had been replaced. It seemed that the other party was not joking, and the atmosphere at the scene immediately dropped to freezing. But to save their lives, they could only reluctantly participate. George asked the black girl first, when did she start having an affair with Freddie? Freddie's affair partner turned out to be the black girl, and Clarissa immediately felt waves of nausea. The black girl honestly admitted that it was about 7 to 8 weeks ago. Next, Freddie and Clarissa both passed the test smoothly. Finally, only James was left. George asked the other party if he had deliberately thrown the movie ticket in the trash that night, wanting George to suspect Kathryn. James refused to admit it, and George continued to expose him. Initially, Arthur definitely proposed the plan to James to steal Severus, because this was most beneficial for disrupting the situation in Moscow, and it could also take the opportunity to implicate Kathryn and then kick George out of the game, which could be said to kill three birds with one stone. Later, James stole Severus and lured Kathryn to Zurich, making her think she was going there to redeem the Severus virus. Then, that night, he threw the movie ticket in the trash, causing George to suspect and discover Kathryn's schedule. James guessed that George would ask Clarissa to help mobilize the surveillance satellite on Kathryn, so he took advantage of the satellite surveillance window period to let Vadim go. Finally, he blamed the betrayal on George. This plan, though cunning, overlooked a deadly problem, which was that James personally opened that account in Myanmar. George took out a stack of photos, on which was an image of James appearing at a bank in Myanmar. Seeing this, James could no longer deny it, grabbed the gun, and admitted that he had done all these things, but he was the one who was right. This was clearly a great opportunity to weaken Russia. For that purpose, he did not hesitate to use poison to kill his bald superior, but now, as long as he did not confess, it was all just speculation. But the fact that George went rogue and moved spy satellites on his own? That's a done deal, that alone is enough to land him in prison for the rest of his life. What James didn't see coming was that George, that sly fox, had secretly planted a recording device, and the gun he was holding was a fake all along. Suddenly, the tables completely turned. After that, George wrapped James' body in a rug and dumped him at some deserted fishing spot. Arthur, who was also in on the bad stuff, didn't dare say a word, he just had to pretend James' disappearance was an accident. George and Kathryn's life went back to normal. That's the end of the story. This movie strikes a really delicate balance between being artistic and being entertaining. Steven Soderbergh, with his usual cool and detached style, takes the spy genre in a much deeper psychological direction. This setup goes way beyond the usual good guy versus bad guy stuff you see in spy movies. Instead, it digs into how suspicion can mess up really close relationships and how it destroys trust. Even though critics on Rotten Tomatoes gave it a 97% fresh rating, the highest of any new movie in North America in 2025, the audience score was only a B. And the opening weekend box office was a total flop at just $7.5 million, which really shows how tough the market can be. This split probably comes down to how the movie pushes back against all the typical spy movie cliches. It cuts out those big, over-the-top action scenes you're used to and replaces them with psychological mind games instead of physical fights. For viewers who are looking for that adrenaline rush, this more subtle approach might feel a little boring. But for fans who are into deep storytelling, this is where the movie really shines. The value of a film lies in its reputation, while the value of a film commentary lies in feelings. That's all for today's video. Thanks for watching. What did you think of the movie? Let me know in the comments below.